Most people believe Genshin Impact to be in their power creep era, with so many of the new characters climbing the charts for most used and most powerful characters. But has Moika finally been able to overthrow the King Neuvillette? Well, here are my top 5 picks for the best DPS in Genshin Impact. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. It is very important that you don't mishear me in this video. I am going to rank these characters as unbiasedly by their power as possible. Yes, I have a bias for certain characters that I prefer to use. However, I have worked very hard to test as much as possible. I am ranking these characters to the best I possibly can based on what I believe is their power level alone. Second, I do not believe in summoning for the strongest DPS to have the strongest DPS. I don't believe in summoning for the strongest DPS to keep up with meta. I really do believe you should go for the DPS that you like the best, and you should build very strong teams around them. Even if they don't appear on the top 5 or in the honorable mentions for this video, you can get it done with your favorites if you work hard enough getting their supports and investing in them properly. So let's get into it. Starting with the honorable mentions, Hu Tao has retained her value as a DPS, and despite being released in patch 1.2, no, it was 1.3, she is still an excellent DPS, one of the top choices in single target, and still to this day receiving buffs, with characters like Citlali making her even stronger. Her lack of AoE is what holds her back from making the top 5, as well as the top 5 achieving comparable or better single target performance, while generally being easier to play. Chaska's another character that is very strong, also has very strong single target, falls off a bit in AoE, has a lot of her troubles fixed with her C1 and C2, and again, although her single target damage is very strong, her lack of C0 performance in AoE, and the fact that her best team, at least in my testing, has Moika to kind of carry her, does hold her back a bit from being higher on this list. Alhaitham is the character that probably has fallen off the most because he just hasn't received any new tools. He's still as strong as he was many patches ago, but most of these other characters have gotten stronger. They've gotten more and more buffs and stronger synergies, while Alhaitham is basically running the same team he did all the way back in Sumeru, which I'll have you remember, Sumeru is closer to Inazuma than it is to now. Sumeru is almost closer to when the game released to where the game is now. So Sumeru was a while ago, and if a character doesn't receive new buffs and synergies in that long, they are not going to be as potent as they once were. He still has a lot of pros, he's still a very good character, but he is not top 5 material anymore. Raiden is a character that has received a ton of synergies, although not impressive with her personal damage, and she does not make the top 5 for DPS. I think it's still worth putting her at least in the honorable mention section because of her ability to drive some of the most powerful characters in the game and reduce the energy needs for powerful characters such as Farina and Yelan. And with the likes of Xilonen, that team has gotten very strong. Shilonen's easily able to get the double buff for Electro and Hydro, and while this team does not make the top 5, especially in terms of damage, the quality of life and ease of use is basically unmatched. One of the most comfortable on-fielders you can play. Still very much holds up as all of the honorable mentions do, but not quite able to crack the top 5. In a similar boat to Chaska, Kinich is very close to making it, although again in my testing his best team includes Citlali and Moika being able to melt, and he does have great synergy as like a sort of a dual DPS carry on that team. It's not strictly his merits that do carry that best team. Nevertheless, his other teams without Citlali are extremely strong. He does very well in single target, and he does decently okay in AoE. His consistency is very high, his reliability is very high. Once again, his damage isn't quite at the level of the top 5 DPS, but he is still very close and extremely strong. The last two honorable mentions are quite different. Lini and Mualani are easily strong enough to make the top 5. In fact, they are definitely in the top 5 if you count peak potential the highest. But both Lini and Mualani require something that the top 5 DPS don't, and that is your sanity. These characters are very tricky to play. They require either complex setups or multiple resets or a degree of player skill that the top 5 DPS just don't. And although I do count peak potential reasonably high on this list, I also count ease of use, player satisfaction, and overall sanity. So characters like Lyney and Mualani, although they absolutely have ridiculous peaks, their peaks still aren't as high as the top characters on the list, and it is much trickier to extract that level of power from them. So if you want to argue that your Mualani or your Lyney belong in the top 5 because you don't mind either engaging in the skill or the resetting necessary to make them shine, you absolutely can argue that, but I don't want to give people the wrong impression, because many people might use them and not be able to replicate the amazing clears they see from Lyney or Mualani online. So without further ado, let's talk about the actual top 5, with number 5 being Clorand. And I know, no one believes me, but Clorand's damage numbers are really high. If you're not up to speed, you need to take a look at some of the newer calculations with Clorand's aggravate teams, including Xiaolonen, as well as her new overloaded teams with Moika. In addition, I can finally assume that many players will be able to get a C6 Chevreuse. Obviously, not everyone will be able to, but since Chevreuse now shares the banner with Clorand, and she has been on a couple banners before, there are going to be a number of players who finally have the C6 Chevreuse team, and this team got an even bigger buff with Moika. It is a huge waste to run Moika as a support on a Clorand team. At least many people would say that. I wouldn't say that. I would say that is the best utilization of Moika possible. Check out my Clorand guide, by the way. I am totally not biased towards this character. Totally not. But in all honesty, I did really want to strongly consider not putting Clorand in the top 5, but based on all the testing I've done, I do believe Clorand is the overall strongest character out of all the honorable mentions I just mentioned, out of Mualani, Lyney, Kinich, Alhaitham, Raiden, Chaska, Hu Tao, and the other DPSs. I think Clorand is the strongest. I do think the other 4 characters on this list are better DPSs than her, but Clorand's multi-wave potential, her very strong single target, her very big AoE, her ability to have very high peaks with Moika Chevreuse teams, as well as her very strong shielded teams with Thoma or Kirara Xiaolonen, make Clorand my pick for number 5. Number 4 is Navia, the same character I put in number 4 in my last tier list, which everyone flamed me for. And to be fair, I was probably wrong at the time and probably overrating Navia a little bit. I was looking at Navia through a little bit of the potential that she would have in the future, but I had no idea that the potential would include Xiaolonen, who just unlocked Navia to be on another level. Xiaolonen raises the damage ceiling of Navia greatly, adding to her already having some of the easiest gameplay to use in the game. She now has higher single target peaks than Hu Tao, while being much easier to play and doing better in AoE. She now gets a dual DPS partner with Moika, but to be honest, she didn't need that to make the top 4. She was already there before Moika. Moika just made her even better. I don't know what to say. She's very strong. She's very easy to play. She doesn't really have any weakness. Navia is just awesome. If you are wondering, I am considering most of these characters at Constellation 0 with a little bit of consideration for Constellation 1, because I know some people do go for that, but all of these characters have really good weapons or early constellations, and all of them sort of benefit kind of equally. Navia probably benefits the least from her Constellation 1, whereas Clorand gets a huge boost, but she also gets a big boost from her weapon. But she does have a brand new free-to-play weapon that is very good as well. But yeah, mostly we're looking at C0 with their weapon, but all of them are pretty same improvement from their free-to-play weapon to their regular weapon. All of them improve a lot. Number 3, Arlecchino. Some people may think Arlecchino belongs higher, some people may think she belongs lower. I think she's perfect right here at number 3. She was always a very strong DPS, but with Citlali, she went to an absolute another level. I even considered moving her to number 2, but there's other things that prevented her from going there. Citlali not only improved the damage ceiling of Arlecchino, which was already very, very high, but she made it much easier to play. Arlecchino's strongest teams allows Arlecchino to melt very consistently, either melting decently with single cryo or very consistently with a second, having some of the highest peak damage in Genshin, and pretty decent AoE, not quite as good as other characters like Neuvillette, Mawika, or Clorand, but still very solid and respectable AoE, a huge variety of synergies and different teams you can play, but Citlali also gave her much needed resistance to interruption and damage mitigation, allowing it much easier to play Arlecchino without dying. Previously, if you wanted to play her without dying, you had to play her with Zhongli, which constituted in a pretty significant loss of power, but a lot of people felt that that was the best way to play her anyways. But now with Citlali, you don't really have to make any concessions. She does absolutely nutty damage with Citlali and got a lot more comfy and easy to play. Arlecchino, number 3. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, where I make most of the internet hate me. Number 2 is Neuvillette. Yes, he is no longer the best DPS in Genshin Impact anymore. He still is absolutely the king of AoE and the king of comfort. There is no denying that. His raw damage is still very, very impressive, even gaining a new best in slot teammate at Constellation 0 with Citlali and Mawika, allowing for another dual DPS comp, as well as, again, having basically unparalleled AoE with his power wash going almost the length of half an abyss, which is absolutely nutty, and just doing extremely consistent and reliable damage. There is a reason this character has by far the highest usage rate percentage of any DPS. He may not be number 1 on this list, but he probably will be the number 1 most satisfactory DPS for most players most of the time. And there are a lot of criteria that you could switch around and you could use differently that would allow Neuvillette to be the best DPS in the game. But regardless, he is absolutely broken. I highly doubt he will feel power crept anytime soon. He does get a big boost from his C1 and from his weapon, as do many of the characters on this list, so just be aware of damage showcases out there. But even with the battle pass option, and to a degree with his free-to-play option, he still does extremely impressive amounts of damage. He has a ton of flexibility in teammates. Obviously, he has ones that bring us out his strength the most, but he's not tied to any specific teammate. But like all meta DPSs, he does want the best supports to make him the best, whether that be Furina, Shalonin, Kazuha, or now Citlali and Mawika. Don't get it twisted. He might be number 2 on this list, but he is still insanely broken and honestly better than ever. But someone is even better than ever, and you know who it is. Mawika is the best DPS in Genshin Impact, especially if you consider her having Citlali. If you don't consider her having Citlali because that's unachievable or something like that, I do get it, and that would push her to number 2 behind Neuvillette. But the fact is, Mawika will rerun, Citlali will rerun, you will have a chance to get these characters. You don't have to get them right now, it could be later, and this duo is the best duo in Genshin Impact. She is the best DPS in Genshin Impact. So many of the characters on this list, best teams, use Mawika as a sub DPS. Neuvillette's best C0 team includes Citlali and Mawika. The Arlecchino dual DPS team, I don't know if that's Arlecchino's best team, but Citlali melting Mawika's burst and then front loading Arlecchino's damage, that is an absolutely crazy team too, and arguably is one of Arlecchino's best teams. Mawika is on Navia's best team as a dual DPS. She's on Clorand's best team, and if you were to use Clorand's actual best team with C6 or Roron, then you are using Mawika as a dual DPS and not just as a support either. She's on Chaska's best team. She's on Kenich's best team, both as a dual DPS. Because melting her burst, boosted by Citlali, and or Shallonen and or Bennett, or just by itself, or not even melting her burst, is still so extremely powerful. And when you go all in and giga buff Moika, she does clear the fastest, and she is uninterruptible, just like Novelette at C1. Moika is uninterruptible at C0, and between being in Bennett's circle and having Citlali's shield, she is basically unkillable, and she has amazing AoE with her bike. I will admit, I'm not a big fan of her bike gameplay, and it does take a bit to get used to, and there are things you can do to mess up her combos that make her reach her ceiling a bit with a more of a skill cap than a character like Novelette. You can potentially mess up melting her burst or mess up melting her charge attacks, in which case she isn't as consistent as someone like Novelette, but her peaks are still high and her floor is still so high. Just melting her burst alone is ridiculous. It almost doesn't matter what happens after that. So is that power creep? Is that a problem? I will address that in another video, whether I think that that's a problem or not. But for now, let's celebrate Moika overthrowing the king. And there's plenty of things Novelette defenders can still do to say that Novelette is better than Moika, and I think that that's totally fair if you want to go for that. And I know people will absolutely flame me for putting Clorinde in the top 5, but I truly believe that she belongs here, regardless of my bias towards this being my favorite character in the game. I do think she will be the first to leave this list, because she is number 5. I think she'll probably leave this list before she gets another buff, but hey, who knows? I do feel very confident in this list, and I feel confident that no matter who you pick up, you will be able to make a great team with them, even if you don't use the highest end supports. And I know that people will talk about all of these characters needing their weapon, their supports, their whatever, but the truth is, all of these characters are strong enough that whether you're using a free-to-play weapon or a scuffed free-to-play team, all of them perform similarly. All of them are strong enough to carry weak teammates, but none of them are strong enough to, you know, solo with no teammates. So let me know any other thoughts that you have. Make sure to enter the giveaway down below and subscribe for the brand new updated tier list that is coming very, very soon. And if you don't want to do any of those things, that is totally fine. Just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much. Bye for now.